Hello, my name is Mike D, and I'm making a video about the Iroquois Handbook by Reverend John Heckewelder. I've been working on a video about the Sullivan Expedition, which is the forced removal of the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois nations from northern Pennsylvania and upstate New York. The expedition was an official order given by George Washington in 1778 to burn down and raze as many native villages and farms as possible, intending to starve and relocate the British-aligned Haudenosaunee or Iroquois nations, which also helped justify usurping their territories for the patriotic American cause. This is the Susquehanna River, and this is the same river that General Clinton had razed and pillaged as many farms and villages as possible before meeting up with Sullivan in Fort Tioga and then departing from there to Elmira, where Battle of Newtown would take place. While I was researching this expedition, I came across a book titled An Account of the History, Manners, and Customs of the Indian Nations Who Once Inhabited Pennsylvania and its Neighboring States by Reverend John Heckewelder of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. This is the Iroquois Handbook by Reverend John Heckewelder. It was written in the 1800s and published in 1819. John was requested by his friend Caspar Wistar to write his personal account with the Iroquois Society for documentation and historical preservation. Caspar at the time was the president of the American Philosophical Society in Bethlehem, and he insisted John write his own account compared to the many others that lacked experience and honest understanding of Native American life. This book is fascinating to me, not only because of the many factoids regarding Native American culture, but also because of John's commentary of processing and explaining this perceived alien lifestyle for the Western brain to better understand. Before I continue, I would like to quote DJ Peachcobbler regarding historical accounts.
It has been said that the best sources are not unbiased. The best sources are open about their bias. It was me, I said that.
A quick introduction to the Reverend's life story. Mr. Heckewelder was born in Bedford, England, 1743, to zealous Moravian parents. John's father was called to serve and help in the development of the Moravian Church in the New World, so when John was 11, he accompanied his parents to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, living a modest and humble life as a cooper, making barrels until the age of 28. Over time, John was growing tired of the monotony and day-to-day colonial life and insisted on embarking with the missionaries to help spread the gospel to the Native Americans. On April 11, 1762, a young John would achieve his goal by accompanying a renowned missionary named Christian Frederick Post on a mission into Tuscarora's territory near present-day Bolivar, Ohio. However, the mission came to an abrupt conclusion within the year. Due to the growing hostilities towards the white man, which is valid, Pontiac's rebellion would take place in the spring of 1763, so John would have to bide his time and wait for another opportunity. He would, although, still take part in smaller services for the newer Moravian communities in Wyoming and Susquehanna, Pennsylvania throughout the years of 1765 until 1771. In the fall of 1771, John would be appointed as the assistant to David Sessburger, who was another well-known missionary in the area, embarking with David into the Muskingum Valley and performed services throughout the modern-day East Ohio. They extended their influence by building the Moravian communities of Schaumburg, Gnattenhütten, Leichenau, and Salem, up until the Revolutionary War broke out in 1775. Years later, in 1781, John and some Moravian brothers were arrested by the British government and sent to Detroit for interrogation regarding any assistance to the rebelling colonies. After proving the Moravians and his own innocence due to their strict neutrality and peacekeeping doctrines, John resumed the mission from Detroit through northern Ohio. By 1786, John had decided to retire his missionary endeavors and relocated back to Bethlehem with his wife and 2 daughters. He wrote of his adventures and missionary work at this time, expressing the many obstacles he encountered. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils of his countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the wilderness, in weariness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness. Even after his retirement, the Reverend would help perform small services for the church in Bethlehem until 1792. During that year, General Rufus Putnam requested John Heckewelder by name to help negotiate for a peace treaty between the Americans and the Wabash tribe. The good Reverend was successful as a peacemaker, proving his authenticity of understanding Native American life and dialogue. After being pulled back time and time again, helping with the many difficulties of American frontier life, John decided to move his family unit once again in 1801 out to Gnattenhütten, Ohio, serving as a superintendent on a reservation of 12,000 acres of land. Whilst living in Gnottenhutton, Mr. Heckewelder also served as a postmaster, a justice of the peace, and an associate judge of the Court of Common Pleas. After 9 years, John felt content with his efforts and services, thus deciding to retire once again to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. He built a new family home at age 67 that still stands today, and finally sought to rest throughout his remaining years. The Reverend surrounded his property by trees and shrubs he had planted himself, to set it apart from other American homes, allowing John to keep in contact with his many Native American friends. Whilst enjoying his much-deserved peace and rest, his knowledge of Native life was sought after by the American Philosophical Society in Bethlehem. The Reverend would be requested to write as much as he could about what he learned and understood of the Native Americans. John contributed more literary works like the documentation of events that took place throughout his missions, and his last contribution regarding the names of rivers and streams and what their significance meant in English, writing these documents with the intentions to be studied as American history up until his death on January 31st, 1823, at 79 years old. This excerpt from the editor's notes I feel gives a good summary of the Reverend's merits. Mr. Heckewelder was a fair representative of the Moravian missionaries of the 18th century, a class of men whose time was necessarily divided between the discharge of spiritual and secular duties, who preached the gospel and administered the sacraments in houses built by their own hands, who wielded the axe as well as the sword of the Spirit, and who by lives of self-denial and patient endurance sustained a mission among the aborigines of this country in the face of disappointments and obstacles, which would have discouraged any but men of their implicit faith in the divine power of the Christian religion. And now, I just want to briefly read John's introduction of the book with his own words. In what I have written concerning the character, customs, manners, and usages of these people, I cannot have been deceived, since it is the result of personal knowledge of what I myself have seen, heard, and witnessed, whilst residing among and near them for more than 30 years. I have, however, to remark that this history, like other histories of former times, will not in every respect comport with the character of the Indians at the present time, since all of these nations and tribes, by their intercourse with the white people, have lost much of the honorable, virtuous qualities which they once possessed, and added to their vices and immorality. Of this, no one can be a better judge than a missionary residing among them. And if what these people told us more than half a century ago, that lying, stealing, and other vicious acts before the white man came among them were considered as crimes, we may safely conclude, and we may know it to be fact, that from that time to this, and especially within the last 40 years, they have so much degenerated that a delineation of their present character would bear no resemblance to what it was before. It is therefore the history of the early times, not of the present, that I have written. And to those times my delineations of their character must be considered to apply, yet to shew the contrast. I have also delineated some of their present features. The story told by the Iroquois to the white people having their conquered the Lenape and made women of them was much too implicitly believed, for the whites always acted towards the Delawares under the impression that it was true, refused to hear their own account of the matter, and had shut their ears against them when they attempted to inform them of the real fact. This denial of common justice is one of the principal complaints of the Lenape against the English, and what makes part of the tradition history for which they preserve for posterity. This complaint indeed bears hard upon us, and should at least operate as a solemn call to rectify the error, if such it found to be, that we in our own history may not record and transmit erroneous statements of those aborigines from whom we have received this country we know now so happily inhabit. We are bound in honor to acquit ourselves with all charges of the kind which those people may have against us, who in the beginning welcomed us to their shores, in hopes that they and we would sit beside each other as brothers. And it should not be said that now, when they have surrendered their whole country to us and retired to the wilds of a distant country, we turn our backs upon them with contempt. The Reverend uses this book to document the history of the Lenni Lenape, or what the English called their nationality as the Delawares, and the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois, transgressions against them. Now, I have included this text because I feel it shows grace and love that John expresses for the Lenape peoples, in using this book to pose an investigation of the allegations against the Haudenosaunee from the Lenape. Maybe I'll make a video about that another time if you guys would like, but for now, I would like to dive into the very interesting old world of the Northeastern Native American society that John navigated and embraced to help spread the gospel. I also would like to say before I continue, for clarification, this video is for educational purposes and made out of love. I wanted to make this series as a deeper understanding of the Haudenosaunee, the lesser known cultural oddities and even colloquialisms developed into modern day American language. To express new perspectives with appreciation, much like how the Reverend expresses through his words written over 206 years ago. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down below and I'll do my best to address them. To kick this off, let's talk about oratory, signs, and hieroglyphics. In Chapter 10, John reflects on the assertion that Western schools of thought regarding language and intelligence deem the Native American tongue being deficient in words or barbaric through the white man's perspective. Racism. Reading through Chapter 10, John states that he would consistently question the Native Americans who were educated in understanding, reading, writing, and speaking both English and German, whether that they could express their ideas better in either of those languages than in their own, stating that the natives would uniformly answer that they could express themselves much easier in their own native tongue, never being at a loss of words to describe their thoughts, nor needing to gesture to fully communicate their ideas. John doesn't question this, reasoning that his exposure to the entire Bible translated into an indigenous dialect, writing that a Moravian Native American minister would never stumble or struggle finding the words while explaining the abstruse subjects of the Christian faith. John ends this paragraph stating that just because their form of language and grammar differs from the European way of thought, doesn't mean that they are inferior with their form of communication, and thus the end of oral language is completely attained, and more, I think, cannot be required. In the next chapter, Reverend John talks about the written medium most commonly used in the northeast of the continent, being a form of hieroglyphic symbols carved into bark that can indicate specific directions to towns, their respective names, and how far away it was from the marked tree. Also containing information regarding war bands, like the number of warriors within their party, the party's leader, and even how many scalps they've acquired while being on the warpath. Quote, that those who are conversant with those marks can understand them with the greatest ease, as easily, indeed, as we can understand a piece of writing. Although they have not all the same marks, yet I have seen the Delawares read with ease the drawings of the Chippeways, Mingos, Shawanoes, and Wyandots on similar subjects. John also gives an anecdote to express the energetic process of Native American writing, stating a white man in Native American lands had confronted a Shawanoes man riding a horse, and claimed the horse had belonged to him. In response, the Shawanoes man stated, "Friend, after a little while I will call on you at your house, and we shall talk of this matter." Upon confronting the white man at his home, the white man insisted on restoring his horse. "Friend, the horse which you claim belonged to my uncle, who lately died. According to custom, I have become heir to all of his property." The white man responded with anger and renewed his demand, subsequently causing the native man to take coal from the fireplace and making two striking figures on the door of the house. One strike to represent the white man taking his horse, and the other being himself in the act of scalping him, calmly asking the trembling white man if he could understand what he had wrote. This had settled the issue instantly, and the Shawanoes man rode away into the sunset after standing on business. The last excerpt in Chapter 11 is about a speech John had witnessed in Detroit on December 9th, 1801 by Captain Pipe, who was a chief of the Delaware Nation. While sitting down facing the commander in front of hundreds of Native Americans, he held a stick in his hand with a human scalp tied at the end. After some time, he stood up and addressed the governor, giving this speech. "Father," here the orator stopped, and turning around to the audience, with a face full of meaning and a sarcastic look, which I should in vain attempt to describe, he went on in a lower tone of voice, as addressing himself to them. "I have said father, although indeed I do not know why I call him so, having never known any other father than the French, and considering the English only as brothers. But as this name is also imposed upon us, I shall make use of it and say," here he fixed his eyes on the commander, "Father, some time ago you put a war hatchet into my hands, saying, 'Take this weapon and try it on the heads of my enemies, the long knives, and let me afterwards know if it was sharp and good.' Father, at the time when you gave me this weapon, I had neither cause nor inclination to go to war against a people who had done me no injury. Yet, in obedience to you, who say you are my father and call me your child, I received the hatchet, well knowing that if I did not obey, you would withhold from me the necessaries of life, without which I could not subsist, and which are not elsewhere to be procured, but at the house of my father." Father, you may perhaps think me a fool for risking my life at your bidding, in a cause too by which I have no prospect of gaining anything, for it is your cause and not mine. For it is your concern to fight the Long Knives. You have raised a quarrel amongst yourself, and you ought yourselves to fight it out. You should not compel your children, the Indians, to expose themselves to danger for your sakes. Father, many lives have already been lost on your account. Nations have suffered and have been weakened. Children have lost parents, brothers, and relatives. Wives have lost husbands. It is not known how many more may perish before your war will be at an end. Father, I have said that you may perhaps think me a fool for thus thoughtlessly rushing on your enemy. Do not believe this, Father. Think not that I want sense to convince me that although you now pretend to keep up a perpetual enmity to the Long Knives, you may before long conclude a peace with them. Father, you say you love your children, the Indians. This you have often told them, and indeed it is your interest to say so to them, that you may have them at your service. But Father, who of us can believe that you love a people of a different color from your own, better than those who have white skin like yourselves? Father, pay attention to what I am going to say. While you, Father, are setting me on your enemy, much like in the same manner as a hunter sets his dog on the game, while I am in the act of rushing on that enemy of yours with the bloody destructive weapon you gave me, I may, perchance, happen to look back on the place from whence you started me. And what shall I see? Perhaps I see my father shaking hands with the Long Knives. Yes, with those very people he now calls his enemies. I may then see him laugh at my folly for having obeyed his orders, and yet I am now risking my life at his command. Father, keep in what I have said in remembrance. Now, Father, here's what has been done with the hatchet you gave me, handing the stick with the scalp on it. I have done with the hatchet what you ordered me to do, and found it sharp. Nevertheless, I did not do all that I might have done. No, I did not. My heart failed within me. I felt compassion for your enemy. Innocence had no part in your quarrels, therefore I distinguished. I spared. I took some live flesh, which, while I was bringing to you, I spied one of your large canoes, on which I put it for you. In a few days you will receive this flesh, and find that the skin is the same color with your own. Father, I hope that you will not destroy what I have saved. You, Father, have the means of preserving that which with me would perish for want. The warrior is poor, and his cabin is always empty, but your house, Father, is always full. John gives his impression of this speech, stating, "Here we see boldness, frankness, dignity, and humanity happily blended together and most eloquently displayed. I am much mistaken if the component parts of this discourse are not put together much according to the rules of oratory which are taught in the schools, and which are certainly unknown to this savage. The peroration at the end is short but truly pathetic, and I would even say sublime, and then the admirable way in which it is prepared. I wish I could convey to the reader's mind only a small part of the impression which this speech made on me, and all present when it was delivered. It is but justice here to say that Captain Pipe was well acquainted with the noble and generous character of the British officer to whom this speech was addressed. He is still living in his own country, an honor to the British name. He obeyed the orders of his superiors in employing the Indians to fight against us. But he did it with reluctance, and softened as much as he was in his power to the horrors of that abominable warfare. He esteemed Captain Pipe, and I have no doubt was well pleased with the humane conduct of this Indian chief, whose sagacity in this instance was no less deserving of praise than his eloquence. It is thus that great minds understand each other, and even in the most difficult and trying situations, find the means of making the cause of humanity triumph. The next topic I'm going to talk about is the superstitions among the indigenous. The Reverend attempts to explain the depths of their spirituality and its perceived effect in Native American society. John explains the resolve of an average native man, being honorable in business, strong in the face of adversity, and rugged by surviving from the land, of whom can still be brought to a state of fear and anxiety akin to childish naivety once convinced of spiritual warfare taking place among them. It is incredible to what degree the Indians' superstitious belief in witchcraft operates in their minds. The moment that their imagination is struck with the idea that they are bewitched, they are no longer themselves. Their fancy is constantly at work in creating the most horrid and distressing images. They see themselves falling a sacrifice to the wicked arts of a vile unknown hand, of one who would not have dared to face them in fair combat, dying a miserable, ignominious death, a death to which they would 1,000 times prefer the stake with all of its horrors. Providing the first-hand account of a Quaker trader named John Anderson taking place in 1776. The Reverend tells the story of John Anderson confronting the local natives regarding witchcraft and spells, claiming that it was pure fiction and challenged the community to find 2 magicians to perform spells against him. This being an attempt to break the illusion of their witchcraft's unknown power and constitution of fear surrounding it. Upon the arrival of one sorcerer, his excuse not to perform any spells was because Anderson the Quaker was renowned throughout the area as an honest and honorable trader, thus not deserving of the hex requested, which was good enough for the locals because they deemed the first magician to be respectful and honorable, not to use spiritual practices against an honest man. The next day, when the other native warlock had arrived, deciding to follow through with the spiritual attack. However, when the spell was performed, this well-known sorcerer had made the excuse that the white man's diet consisted of too much salt, which had prevented the effectiveness of the spell. The locals accepted this excuse as well and firmly believed that the salty American diet protected the white man against these spiritual attacks. Wrapping up this chapter by claiming he interviewed not only Mr. Anderson, but several credible Indians who were present for the performance, stating that it was impossible to convince the indigenous that their witchcraft was merely delusion and only obtaining power from the victims willingly giving it over their lives. On to the next topic, I would like to talk about song and dance. In chapter 26, the Reverend writes about how he would often attend ceremonies with innocent intent to witness the impressive coordination of songs and the intensive celebrational dances that correlates with them, stating that the singing would always start with one individual's and others fall in successively until the general chorus begins, with the drum beating to help with the timing, something like a communal metronome. The dances that signify war and violence and the implications of performing them were usually to intimidate or scare the intended victims, who would witness this expression. Before leaving to take part in a campaign, the war dance is always performed directly to a painted post. This is the Native American method of recruiting warriors for their party, as whoever joins in the dance is considered as having enlisted for the campaign and creates an obligation to join in the war band when they depart. Upon returning back to their communities, if successful, a dance of thanksgiving is expressed. This dance holds reverence to their spiritual respect to their ancestors and their duty to uphold honor within the warrior class, with women only allowed to sing but not join in the dancing. Usually this ceremony is ended with a scalp yell, as John calls it, which is demanded at the end of every song performed. The scalp yell being a form of shouting in succession, counting scalps after a battle. John includes the song of the Lenape warriors going out against the enemy. "Oh, poor me, who am going out to fight the enemy, and know not whether I shall return again, to enjoy the embraces of my children and my wife. Oh, poor creature, whose life is not in his own hands, who has no power over his own body, but tries to do his duty for the welfare of his nation. O thou great spirit above, take pity on my children and my wife. Prevent their mourning on my account. Grant that I may be successful in this attempt, that I may slay my enemy, and bring home trophies of war to my dear family and friends, that we may rejoice together. Oh, take pity on me. Give me the strength and courage to meet my enemy. Suffer me to return again to my children, to my wife, and to my relations. Take pity on me and preserve my life, and I will make to thee a sacrifice." This song to me shows the humanity of the Lenape, beautiful and painful, motivated by duty and honor, with reverence for our almighty creator and promising a sacrifice and prayer to come back home safe after battle. Heckewelder writes in chapter 36 that drunkenness and abuse of strong liquors had an immeasurable effect on Native society as a whole. John goes in depth with the cultural effects of alcoholism causing a divide between indigenous and the Americans, mostly due to the manipulative American traders that would get their victims drunk before selling, buying, or just outright stealing from the intoxicated Native traders. This would become a repeating pattern, so much so that Native communities would confront and deny certain traders from doing business among them. And I would like to end this video with a quick quote from chapter 36. that I find really interesting regarding American history as it relates today. The curious account given by the Delawares and Mohicans on the scene which took place when they were first made to taste spirituous liquors by the Dutch who landed on New York Island. I have no doubt that this tradition is substantially founded in fact. Indeed, it is strongly corroborated by name which, in consequence of this adventure, those people gave at that time to the island, and which it has retained to this day. They called it Manahawktanak, which in the Delaware language means the island where we all became intoxicated. We have corrupted this name to Manhattan, but not so as to destroy its meaning or conceal its origin.
Reverend John was a badass.
This book to me is an amazing account of a long-lost world, buried by time and benevolence. Reverend John Heckewelder gave understanding and grace to the indigenous of this country, embracing the culture as a servant to better help spread spiritual freedom with the good news. I believe the good Reverend was not of this world. He merely operated as an agent for peace and love within it, and produced a lot of good fruits with his labors during a tumultuous time in American history. Thank you, John, for your passion and hard work you dedicated to preserve these cultural insights and experiences you had. Your literary work deserves more respect and recognition, and hopefully this video can garner some attention. And thanks to you for watching the entire video. If you have any questions about what maybe John Heckewelder would have wrote about, please shoot them down in the comments below and I'll gladly make a video about it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and thanks again for watching. Peace.